speakers on stage to you. In the middle, we have Mr. Zhe Chanchong, Chief Superintendent of PPRB. On his left-hand side, we have Mr. Kong Wing Chung, Senior Superintendent of PPRB, and on the right-hand side of Mr. Zhe, we have Mr. Li Kuai-hua, Senior Superintendent of Organized Crime and Crime Bureau. On Mr. Li's right-hand side, we have Mr. Vasco Williams, Acting Senior Superintendent of Anti-North, and then we also have Mr. Fang Chi-kin, Superintendent Operations. The speakers will say a few opening remarks, and then we'll have the Q&A session. Each journalist can ask up to 3 questions. Mr. Z, over to you.
Thank you. In the past weekend, rioters continue to beat up members of the public and also vandalize public facilities. Crazily, they set fire and hurl petrol bombs, desecrated a national flag, snatch pistol, and they have escalated their violence, and we are now in a situation of no return. On Saturday, a number of radical rioters were in Tuen Mun. They vandalized things, and they used metal barriers, trash cans to block roads. They set fire and also paralyzed the traffic. And they also tore down national flags from government buildings. A number of times, spray painted them, stepped on them, and burned them. They blatantly desecrated the national flags. This is very infuriating. And then they went into exits of MTR stations, broke vending machines, octopus machines, and also CCTV cameras. Some went into our tracks. They hurled objects onto it and destroyed the signal equipment. On Sunday, some had no regard for railway safety. Illegally, they went into the driving cab of a train in Namchang Station. They put down the emergency steps, and they hurled objects into the tracks. They had no regard for the safety of passengers. Should there be a derailing accident causing great casualties, who should be held liable? The rioters hurled bricks and slingshots and petrol bombs at police officers with the intention to kill. Some police vehicles caught fire as a result of being hurled petrol bombs. You can see the photos here. And then on Saturday night, a rioter in Yunnan blatantly threw petrol bombs at a police vehicle with officers. And then because the officers were severely threatened to protect his and other people's safety, he disembarked and pointed his gun to disperse the crowd. And this police officer acted in great bravery and with restraint and decisively, and he was very reasonable. And then when police officers were trying to subdue rioters, more than 10 rioters used umbrellas, hiking sticks, and hard objects to attack police officers. Some even wanted to snatch the pistol from that police officer. You may like to take a look at the video. And then someone online advocated violence against police officers. They analyzed how they could successfully snatch a pistol. So from online discussion, this is now materialized into real action. So if the pistol were really snatched away by the rioters, what would be the consequence? What option is left for the police? Now, this is a very serious warning from the police. Anyone who attempts to rob our police officers of their accoutrement and pistols, we will certainly stop them with appropriate force, and the rioters will only have themselves to blame. And then rioters like to take the law into their own hands and beat up civilians, and this is spread to every corner in Hong Kong. They have escalated in their violence. They attacked indiscriminately members of the public, and they have shown their true brutal faces. On Saturday night in Yunnan, in a very short area, there were 4 cases of rioters beating up members of the public. at Holland Road on Saturday night, there was a quarrel between two civilians and rioters. Those rioters used metal sticks and rubbish cans and beat the two persons until they bled in their head. Although some members of the public tried to stop them, but then a female rioter hit that man with a road sign until he beat it. At around the same time, a man in vest happened to pass Yuen Long Main Road, and the rioters' presence suspected him of trying to remove the posters. He was encircled. Although he had got onto a taxi, he was pulled down by rioters and not allowed to leave, and then he was cornered, and people used umbrellas to conceal his head, and then he was hit until his head bleeded, and then the rioters fled afterwards. Such violence is really very infuriating. From propaganda of rioters, the police could see that they are trying to glamorize or even romanticize their brutality using specious argument to explain the reasons for silencing other people and to deprive people of their freedom of expression. We can see that rioters think that if they beat people up on the streets and then they can silence people and that can be very successful. And why should these rioters deprive other people of their freedom of expression? Is that what they call freedom of expression?
And nowadays, our community is full of this kind of hypocrisy that serves to glorify violence, but instead it's condoning aggression. What is sad is that rioters are inciting innocent students to take part in such illegal acts. And I believe Hong Kong people are sick of such recurrent violence. I urge all sensible and pragmatic people to step forward and not stand around as the rioters commit unlawful acts, because you might be taken as supporting them. I want to stress that the scene of the violence is very dangerous. The rioters are using different lethal weapons to attack police officers and batter people with different political views, and they are also vandalizing public service utilities. They are extremely violent, and they could inadvertently injure the public. So the scene of such attacks are extremely dangerous, and no one should linger there. The police has the responsibility to disperse and arrest these people as soon as possible to contain the situation. And scenes can turn violent in a split second, so please stay away from these scenes. When the police needs to conduct dispersals, anyone must leave. For journalists who need to stay and report at the scene, they must also stay away from the police cordon line in order to not obstruct the conduct of duty by police officers. I saw cases in which protesters were hurt by the petrol bombs hurled by themselves, and the journalists were in a very dangerous situation. We often saw people with helmets or reflective vests, or people holding first aid packs claiming to be first aiders. They claim to be citizens first aiders. We understand that some people are passionate in saving lives and they want to offer immediate treatment to injured people. Like the public, the police's first priority is on saving lives. If anyone needs treatment, the police would summon ambulatory services from the Fire Services Department as soon as possible, or defer to police officers at the site with basic first aid knowledge. However, we stress that for safety reasons, when we disperse crowds, even the so-called citizens, first aiders, social workers, and journalists must stay away from the site because the site could be very dangerous. In our arrest this past Saturday, we arrested 3 people claiming to be first aiders, and from 2 of these people, we seized laser guns, and we seized a laser gun from one of those arrestees, while another did not carry any personal ID. And the police has the responsibility to ensure the safety of arrestees, and we have strict guidelines, and when necessary, we might request help from first aiders. Our officers also have basic first aid training and can offer first aid treatment. So the police have not conducted any acts that violate human rights. On the other hand, we have ensured that arrestees would receive appropriate treatment. Some protesters might be concerned that they might be arrested after receiving treatment at hospitals, but I stress that lives are always the top priority. The police would not jeopardize the chances of arrestees being treated, and saving lives is always our top priority.
The Hong Kong Human Rights Watch accused the police of obstructing ambulance and paramedics from treating the injured and refusing to allow them hospital treatment at once. Well, I beg to differ from such accusations. And there are also claims that the injured protesters did not seek help from hospital. I like to stress that, well, if they have broken the law, they have to bear the legal consequences, and they cannot blame it on the police. Let me reiterate that the police will give priority to the medical needs of the people affected. We will not be in the way of any humanitarian rescue. And I give the floor to Mr. Kong to brief you on the situation of arrests over the weekend. Thank you. Number of arrests. On the 20th of July, Friday, we arrested 10 persons aged between 15 and 59 who were suspected of illegal assembly in Yuen Long Station. And then on Saturday, we arrested 33 persons, 27 men and 6 male, aged between 13 and 54 years old. They were suspected of unlawful assembly, possession of possessive organ, possession of objects that can be used for illegal purposes, and public disorder and desecrating of the national flag. On Sunday, we arrested 42 men and 5 male, aged between 14 to 64 years old, and the suspected of unlawful assembly, possession of offensive weapon, possession of object fit for unlawful purposes, and disorder behavior in the public, and desecration of the national flag. I have to say that openly and purposely burning, destroying, smearing, desecrating, and stepping on our national flag or national emblem is an offense and liable to imprisonment of 3 years. The government will not allow anyone to carry out any desecration of our national flag. We will take that very seriously. As for total number of arrests, as at yesterday, we've arrested 1,556 persons. 1,261 men, 295 male, aged between 12 and 83. In the operations over the past weekend, 4 police officers were injured on duty. One was assaulted by rioters when trying to arrest them, and some were caught by bricks hurled at them. As for use of firearms, on the 25th, on Friday, no firearms were used. And then on the 21st, Saturday, we had 32 rounds of tear gas, 1 round of sponge grenade. And for the 22nd of September, yesterday, we're still taking stock of what we've used. Now I'd like to clarify something. There were rumors that on Saturday, when we arrested someone in Yuen Long, the man was dragged into a back alley and was beaten until he became unconscious. Now this is a very serious and untrue accusation. In Feng Yao North Street, we were pressing on. We intercepted 2 persons for interrogation, and then there were many rioters shouting and trying to charge at our police line. For the safety of our search and to protect the privacy of the persons in question, we took the 2 men to a back alley for investigation. Meanwhile, there were many rioters charging at our line and attacking police officers. After repeated warnings to no avail, we used pepper spray to disperse them. And in the process, we arrested a 48-year-old man for assaulting the police.
And there are rumors online that we beat up this person at the back alley. It was untrue. For the 3 persons, including the intercepted man and the arrestee, they were searched at the alley, and after they were searched, there was nothing suspicious on their part, so they were released. And the arrestee claimed to be feeling uncomfortable after he was searched, and he remained conscious when he was taken to hospital. And the footage circulated online could not clearly show what happened at that moment, and there was no context to the video, so it could not fully reflect the situation. The police are yet to receive any complaints on the incident. There are also rumors that this past Sunday, some police officers disguised as protesters, and they collected gear from a police vehicle. We can confirm that the person shown was a police officer, and he was wearing a STS uniform, so the accusation was untrue. There was no police officer passing out as a protester collecting gear from a police hospital. There are also rumors that police officers were disguised as rioters and vandalized the facilities at Kwai Fong MTR station. We looked at the relevant photos, and we can confirm that this accusation was also completely untrue. The persons vandalizing the facilities were not our police officers, and the retractable baton shown was not the equipment used by the force. I want to stress that illegal possession of these retractable batons might be liable to the offense of possession of dangerous weapon, and the maximum imprisonment is 3 years. And there are also rumors that a woman holding a retractable baton helped subdue protesters and she was suspected to be an undercover officer. We can confirm that this woman was a casual clothes police officer in that police district. She was carrying out duty at the MTR station and observing the situation in order to facilitate manpower deployment. And when the police cleared the scene due to incidents happening close by, arrests were being made and some protesters were being subdued by our officers. This casual clothes officer provided support to other police officers in making arrests. Since the situation evolved rapidly, she did not have time to put on her police vest. And since the situation was chaotic, we subsequently confirmed that this woman was a police officer. I will now hand over to Mr. Lee. I would like to talk about some court cases this past weekend. On Saturday and Sunday at Tuen Mun and Sha Tin, respectively, there were cases in which the national flag was desecrated and 2 people were arrested. In Tuen Mun, a 13-year-old girl, and at Sha Tin, a 21-year-old man was arrested. For the 13-year-old girl, a first court appearance was made at the Tuen Mun Magistrates Court today, and the 21-year-old man is still being detained. In the Yuen Long incident, the police also arrested a 25-year-old man for possession of a suspected samurai sword as well as a hammer. He was charged with possession of offensive weapon. And this afternoon, a court appearance was made at Tuen Mun Magistrates Court. And at Mong Kok, the police found that a man was in possession of a petrol bomb. And this afternoon, he was taken to the West Kowloon Magistrates Court for a court appearance, and he was charged with possession of a weapon. And on Saturday afternoon at Tuen Mun, at Tuen Wui Street, about 100 protesters blocked the roads with various objects and paralyzed traffic, and they also hurled various items and petrol bombs at the police. When making arrests, one 19-year-old man was arrested, and he was charged with rioting at the Fanling Magistrates Court this afternoon. And in the last weekend, we seized some offensive weapons. This is one of the umbrellas seized. You can see that this is what the umbrella looks like. It was modified, and it could then be used to attack other people, and it's obvious that they were targeting police officers. According to the Public Order Ordinance and the definition of offensive weapons, such items modified to become these items are modified to become offensive weapons. And we have seen a lot of petrol bombs these days that look like this. When they were seized, there were fuels and liquids which would increase their potency. very often rioters would smuggle these items in various ways and before deploying them. I stress that if you possess such petrol bombs and are intercepted by the police, you would be charged with possession of offensive weapon. And according to Section 62 of the Crimes Ordinance, there is a heavier offense that carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. And if you use such item, then it would amount to arson. And according to Section 60 of the Crimes Ordinance, the maximum sentence is life imprisonment. So I warn anyone against casually deploying these items because there could be very serious consequences even if no one is injured. It can still result in a sentence.
I'd like to conclude. In the past 3 months, we have seen unprecedented chaos in Hong Kong. The violent demonstrators have hijacked people who like to take part in peaceful assemblies and rallies, and Hong Kong is now endangered. In the past weekend, people set fires on road, damaged railway facilities, trying to paralyze our airport, and they hold petrol bombs and indiscriminately attack people. What they call liberating Hong Kong is in fact trying to destroy our prosperity and to taint Pearl of the Orient. And we must not condone such violence. When a civilized society is faced with such violence, we need to take action and say no to violence. We appeal to the public to take action and cut ties with these rioters. We must condemn violence regardless of your professional or your status. You should help to stop violence, and you should come out and do not turn a blind eye to violence and report to the police. Now I'd like to summarize what I said in English.
16th week of the protest. Over the weekend, rioters went on a rampage across the city, starting fires on the street, hurling petrol bombs, violently attacking innocent people, and inflicting mass property destruction. Some even desecrated national flags and attempt to snatch an officer's gun. All these acts will only push Hong Kong to the verge of a man-made disaster. On Saturday, a large number of radical protesters deviate from the approved route of public possession and wreak havoc in Tuen Mun and Yuen Long districts. Apart from building barricades on main roads to paralyze traffic, rioters smash up MTR facilities and destroy various public properties. What's worse, some even threw objects into the railway and misused the emergency facilities. Their acts indeed hamper the safety of the entire MTR system. We make this very clear: whatever ideals they claim they are fighting for do not justify the use of violence. This is simply reckless and rudeness violence. On multiple occasions, radical protesters remove national flags from poles before trampling, desecrating, and burning them. The police certainly do not tolerate such acts and will bring offenders to justice. The use of dangerous and sometimes deadly weapons by radical protesters is especially alarming. Bricks, metal marbles, slingshots, petrol bombs, knives, and even knives attached to umbrellas are among the dangerous weapons used. In Saturday night, rioters hurled petrol bombs at police vans in Yuen Long. Our officers' lives were under great danger. To protect himself and his colleagues, one officer alighted the van, pulled out his surface revolvers to disperse the crowd. His use of force is totally justified and decisive. In another incident, tens of rioters attacked one of our officers with hard objects, hiking sticks, and umbrellas. One even attempted to grab his surface revolver. Certain online comments even teach people how to effectively snatch police guns. Can you imagine the consequence if a loaded firearm fell into the hands of these rioters? In any case, our officers are justified in using appropriate force to contain the situation. Moving on, another alarming that shows signs of escalating is the use of indiscriminate violence against innocent bystanders. Over the weekend, many rioters violently beat up people who hold different views, taking the law in their own hands. In Hong Kok Road, two middle-aged men had an argument with some rioters. Then a swarm of rioters surrounded the two victims and assaulted them with metal sticks. One female rioter even struck the victim's head with a folding chair. Almost around the same time in Castle Peak Road, some rioters suspected a man tore down some poster from a wall and beat him up harshly, leaving him with bloody injuries. What's worse, the rioters just fled after publicly shaming him. Nothing can glorify or justify this indiscriminate use of violence against innocent bystanders. We appeal to the victims of these assaults to come forward and make reports to the police. We are aware that many self-proclaimed first aiders in hamlets or reflective vests gathering on protest sites. They claim to have various medical qualifications and were trying to render medical assistance to those in need during violent clashes. We certainly understand their passion for helping others. Saving lives is always the top priority of police. If situation warrants, our officer will arrange for medical attention from ambulance officers. However, we must emphasize, during a dispersal operation, even these self-proclaimed first aiders must leave the scene. Regardless of their occupations, outfits and roles, they must obey police instructions. We certainly disagree with the accusation made by the Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor that we are targeting first aiders. As long as the self-proclaimed first aiders do not commit any lawful acts, our officers have no reason to arrest them. If the injured person had already been arrested, we are fully responsible for his safety. Normally, our officers will call for an ambulance. In the meantime, our officers who are trained in first aid will also monitor their condition. We must emphasize during initial medical treatment, the injured people may have drastic change in condition. The issue of liability is crucial. We cannot let someone who claims to be a medic give medical assistance to an arrested person. That would be a highly irresponsible act. The police have very strict internal guidelines on the protection of arrested persons' safety and well-being. Saving life is of utmost importance, and our officers will do their utmost to protect the safety of arrested person. Now I'll give an update on arrested figures. On Friday, we arrested two males, aged 42 and 59 years old, for unlawful assembly in Yuen Long MTR station. On Saturday, we arrested 33 people, consisting 27 males and 6 females, aged between 13 and 54 years old. They were arrested for unlawful assembly, assaulting a police officer, disorderly conduct in a public place, and desecrating a national flag. On Sunday, we arrested 47 people, consisting 42 males and 5 females, aged between 14 and 64 years old. Their offenses include unlawful assembly, loitering, dangerous driving, theft, and desecrating a national flag. In conclusion, it's been 3 months in Hong Kong has been gripped by a spiral of violence. Peaceful protests have been hijacked by radical protesters to commit destructive acts like arson, property destruction, hurling of petrol bombs, and indiscriminate attack on innocent citizens. Ordinary citizens are constantly living in fear as a result of widespread violence. Everyone in the society is a loser. I must emphasize no excuses, no propaganda can justify or glorify such acts of violence. We appeal to every member of the public to cut ties with all criminal elements and join us in condemning such violence acts. We all should stand up to stamp our violence right now. Thank you.
We now proceed to the questions and answer. The first, the lady on the second row, please. I'm from cable TV. Can you please speak up? in the dispersal operation last night, in particular in Mong Kok. You confirmed that there was a woman who was a police officer. We photographed at least 5 people, masked and clad in black. Were they all police officers? And in your dispersal operation yesterday, how many undercover officers were deployed and dressed as protesters? There are reports that some police officers passed up as first aiders on site. Can you confirm that? And for how long were the undercover officers there? And you mentioned that at Feng Yao Buck Street, there are rumors that some people were dragged to the back alley, and there's footage online showing that that person was kicked by a police officer. You clarified that it was untrue. Would you actually disclose the video footage you took in order to clarify the situation? From the footage, we saw that the police officer kicked that person once. So how was that justified as part of the search operation? As for the officer in Tuen Mun who and someone was trying to snatch his gun, you said appropriate force would be deployed if that happens, and the relevant people must pay the consequences. So what was the specific kind of force you were describing? Are you going to deploy live ammunition? I would defer to Mr. Kong for the first question, and I will defer to Mr. Williams for the second, and Mr. Fang for the third. Thank you. First of all, the incident near Mong Kok Police Station last night. Like I said at the beginning, that woman with a retractable baton was a casual clothes officer from Mong Kok District. She was observing the situation in order to facilitate the deployment of police officers in the area. I confirmed that other plainclothes officers were also working at the site, but in terms of the actual numbers and details of their work, those are operational details which I will not divulge. Like I said, the numbers and details of our deployments cannot be disclosed.
Yes, I'm here to answer the question about the alleged assault inside the alleyway of Feng Yao North Street. Now, you mentioned a video in which it shows what appears to be an officer kicking a yellow object on the ground. Now, we don't know what that object is, but there are other videos that are more clear that show the entire incident. And there's no malpractice by the police whatsoever in the clear video. Now, we see a... Yes, but...
呢位記者，你可唔可以跟翻個位？而家係 Cable 問緊嘅，唔該呢位蘋果。
It's Cable TV's turn. Please wait for your turn.
Please let me answer your question.
I think you have to stop.
There are videos which show the entire incident where no assault resulted. Now, I've seen that video myself. Now, I've seen videos of other videos of people that have doctored the video to show police kicking people. The genuine online feed showed that there was no such assault. Now, there is a video online that shows that no assault occurred. We will ask the maker of the video you're referring to come forward and show us the original copy of that video, because any incident of police violence will be investigated.
We had that interview, he said that he would...
我諗我哋繼續翻 Cable。
Let's continue with the footage provided by Cable TV.
For him to come forward, and we will interview them. It's very easy to make allegations when you don't have to come forward to verify that allegation, isn't it?
But no matter...
I think we can continue to answer the Cable, the number 3 question of Cable.
我個時間交俾阿方 Sir，唔該。
好，唔該阿 Sir。咁我哋講
Mr. Fang. in terms of the snatching of pistol, the journalist asked why our officer would be alone at that time, but it was not the case. During police, when the police advanced, well, we have checked footage before and after the incident, and we found that as the police advanced, well, an arrest operation was underway, and when the officer was trying to subdue the suspect, apparently a foreigner tackled our police officer from the back, and he was surrounded by a big group of protesters, and they were hoping to snatch the suspect. After our officer was tackled to the ground, he was constantly assaulted, and from the footage, we can see that a violent protester tried to snatch his baton, while another protester approached the officer from his right, trying to snatch his gun. So that was what actually happened. If our officer's gun is snatched, what kind of force are we going to deploy? Like the JPOA mentioned earlier, when there is escalation of violence, what kind of force would be deployed? Well, like we explained last week in our press conference, if you feel that petrol bombs can inflict serious injury on our officers, if rioters hold a police pistol, what do you think the consequences can be? I think it's not hard to imagine. We have very strict guidelines on the use of force as to whether we are going to use live ammunition if our pistol is snatched. Well, of course, we hope to subdue violence, but based on our internal guidelines and the police general orders, our first consideration is to protect the lives of ourselves and others. And we stress that we are going to use proportionate force. We would consider the need and proportionality if force is deployed, and we have to consider the threats faced by our officers before we decide the level of force. Thank you.
Well, I think we've discussed this issue a number of times, whether real firearms would be used. Well, it doesn't mean that as soon as our pistol has been snatched, we would fire. It depends on his follow-up behavior. Would he point his gun at us? And it also depends on the judgment of our officers on spot. First row.
I just want to follow up on the question of snatching of revolvers. We've seen videos, of course, of the protesters snatching revolvers and civilians beating up other civilians. But of course, I also have to mention that we've seen videos of police officers surrounding protesters and beating them up. Again, I don't know whether they're doctored, but these are videos that have been online. And also, reporters have also been pepper sprayed on the ground. Can I just ask, at this point, would the Hong Kong Police Force's position still be one of restraint? And what other criteria would you consider before elevating that response? And on the question of snatching of revolvers, given that there are so many different types of police officers on the ground, especially those civilian officers, how secure are their holsters? And for those officers who can bring their revolvers back home, do you allow them to bring, or rather, do you allow them to buy holsters? And how secure are they? My second question is on resources. We've seen recently how the airport stress test has resulted in large-scale operations, deployment of manpower and resources, and also large groups of civilians, some who describe them as pro-China, pro-government, also attacking pro-democracy protesters. Given these two new trends, when police officers have to now face these two opposing camps, it's potentially a three-cornered fight. And if these two new trends keep sustaining, moving forward, how can the police ensure that the manpower are efficiently made use of? My last question would be on members of public giving tip-offs. Since the WhatsApp hotlines were halted. To date, how have members of the public reached out to police force? Can you give me a sense of how many cases they've reported to you, and of which, how many actually resulted in follow-up and enforcement actions? Thank you.
I'll invite Mr. Fong to answer the first question, and I'll answer the other two later.
Yep. Thank you, sir. As mentioned in some previous press conferences, and we have been saying that we have a set of very strict and stringent guidelines in relation to the use of force. And I would say we are certainly restrained in this regime, and we will continue to uphold this principle. So in terms of the tactical response, it always depends on the professional judgment of our police officers on the operational ground. And before deploying a specific tactics of using force, our frontline officers will always conduct risk assessment. And there are three factors that dictate their risk assessment. The first one would be the level of threat being faced by our police officers. And the second one would be how the officers perceive the threat. And finally, what level of force should be deployed by our police officers. And the guiding principle of using force is always the necessity and the proportionality. And our officers will only use the force which is strictly necessary and is incommensurate with the situation in order to achieve a lawful purpose. So in recent protests, as we can see, some violent protesters even use pistol-like objects, bows and arrows, slingshots, and petrol bombs, all sorts of lethal weapons, I would say. So given the escalating violence and deadlier weapons used by protesters, and our officers have been facing a lot more dangerous situation on the operational ground. But we have exercised restraint and deliberately avoid physical contact with protesters as far as possible. So once the situation is under control, the use of force will cease. So in relation to the snatching of equipment, including firearms from our police officers, thank you for bringing up this issue again. And yes, you are absolutely correct. The situation is actually quite alarming. And as we have repeatedly mentioned previously, the violence or the illegal acts engaged by protesters nowadays were actually beyond the boundary. And that is something unacceptable in a civilized society. So to set the record straight, and as a matter of fact, the possible offences resulting from the snatching of equipment or even firearms include snatching, robbery, assaulting a police officer, possession of arms and ammunition without a license. And amongst these offences, the most obvious one that will probably be committed by people snatching our equipment would be robbery, which carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. So we strongly condemn the violence acts of protesters, and we would like to reiterate that we have zero tolerance for violence and will diligently enforce the law for public safety and public order. So in relation to how to prevent our equipment from being snatched, our officers, whether newly recruited or serving, receive rigorous training on how to use different levels of force and protect their equipment, such as firearms. And we have been issuing or providing the best equipment to our officers, and therefore it's not necessary for our officers to purchase their own holsters. So I hope my answers and explanation are to your satisfaction. Thank you.
For your question, second question about the sustainability of our manpower and resources, based on the changing trend and tactics being used by the protesters, I'll say the Hong Kong Police Force management certainly values the sustainability of manpower and resources. And we have basically made a lot of respective arrangement on the allocation of manpower and resources in response to the ongoing unrest since June this year. For example, basically our management has made an adjustment to our shift patterns of our officers. A lot of our officers have to work 12 hours shift now. In the past, it's only 9 hours. Also, we make good use of our auxiliary police officers. They're deployed in the front lines to assist our officers, like they did a lot of daily patrol duties or crowd management duties. And definitely, the turnout rate of our auxiliary police officers was quite high in the last few months. And we can see an increasing number of applications received it from auxiliary police officers, quite significantly, which indicates basically that's the commitment of our members of the public from different walks of life in supporting the force in restoring the public order in Hong Kong. And lastly, we will deploy new tactics and new equipment to upgrade our competency in controlling the situations. But we are up against lawlessness. I would say if majority of the Hong Kong population do not obey the law, basically I'm sure that no police in the world can deal with that situation. And for your third question about the how the general public can reach out to police to tip off those violent cases, although the WhatsApp hotlines or services has been hooked, and definitely for urgent cases, we always appeal to the members of the public to call 999 in Hong Kong. Our control center will deploy appropriate manpower to deal with the urgent situation. For non-urgent matters, basically they feel free to make use of our e-report room as well, e-report center, and they can make non-urgent information by sending what we call the crime information form on our internet. Our intelligence unit will vet and prioritize those information before sending out the intelligence to crime teams for follow-up. Definitely, although the suspension of the WhatsApp hotlines, will continue to explore new platforms to receive crime information from the public. But I'm sorry that I cannot tell you how many of those reports are genuine and what are we going to develop on those information we received in the past. Thank you.
下位，第三行後邊間條3個啦。
Third line. Well, I'm from Taikong. As regards desecration of the national flag, Mr. Lee said the 2 men were arrested. I'd like to know the total number of arrests associated with insulting the national flag. So you've arrested 1,500 odd persons. I'd like to know how many of them have been charged. Netizens talked about taking the law into their own hands. I'd like to ask how the police will follow up and how you're going to arrest and punish them. There are many rumors linking cases of suicides with the Prince Edward Station and St. Oakling incidents. Can you clarify whether they are true or not? I will answer. Mr. Lee will take the second question, and Mr. Gong will take the first and third question. All right, the first question is about desecrating our national flag.
Based on the information I have on hand, since the 9th of June, there are 9 cases of desecration of national flags that are under investigation, of which 5 cases, in 5 of the cases, arrests have been made. And these include the case in early October in Tsim Sha Tsui, as well as the case early September at Tung Chung Swimming Pool, as well as the case in early September at the central government offices. And in my opening address, in the cases on 21st and 22nd of September, 5 people were arrested. The other cases are still pending investigation. As for the suicide cases you mentioned, the police are much concerned about them, and that is why we regularly make various clarifications through press conferences and through our newsroom. We would issue press releases and address questions from the media. At St. Oakling and at MTR Prince Edward Station on the 31st of August, there were no cases of death, and at MTR Prince Edward Station, the hospital authority and fire services department have made clarifications. And in our own clarifications in the past, we do not understand the reason for creating such rumors. If people have died, this is a very serious accusation. They could not be proved just through some online rumors. I trust that most people are sensible. We have examined reports of missing persons. There was no missing person report related to public order events. We have tried to clarify the matter as much as we can, and I don't understand what the motives are for continuing to spread such rumors. So once again, I stress that on the 31st of August at Prince Edward MTR station, there were no deaths. So this is something confirmed by the HA and FSD already. I now hand over to Mr. Lee. Before I answer the question, I'd like to offer more information on how the police would investigate suicides and missing person cases. For a suicide, we would deploy officers immediately, and we might send crime investigation officers to see if there is any.
到某一段嘅時候咧，佢覺得佢想睇清楚啲個案件有冇可疑嘅話咧，亦都會轉交俾當區嘅總區重案組咧，就去審視嘅。所以咧，其實我哋警方對依類嘅案件咧係相當謹慎去睇嘅，而將佢聯繫埋一啲被指稱係有死亡嘅案件咧，我覺得對我哋。
I think the alleged deaths or such claims are very unfair to us. As for the other case in which a group of rioters attacked a group of people with different political views, and like other assault cases, we would defer the cases to our crime investigation teams. I'd like to share some of my past experience in such cases. For group assaults on a group of people, very often they would elevate and become more violent, and in some cases there could be deaths. If a gang of people inflict death on a person, then everyone in the group would be equally liable. So I hope everyone would be sensible in handling difference in opinion, and they should not resort to violence. RTHK, please. I'm from RTHK. As for the alleged allegation that some people try to take law into their own hands, Mr. William described the object as a yellow object. Can you explain why you believe that yellow object was not a person? So what was the officer kicking? Can you be more specific? Can you promise to disclose the clear video or footage? Are you going to play the footage that you claim would show the whole picture? As for arrests made this past weekend by the police, you said, well, some volunteer first aiders were arrested, and at the airport, a person in possession of more than one octopus card was arrested, and also people in possession of protest slogans or banners. I think possessing a banner is not illegal. As well, at Prince Edward Station, an arrested person asked to be covered by a police shield, and he was rejected, whereas last time at North Point, the same request was granted. So was such treatments discriminate on the police's part? And you said journalists were asked to go back to the pavement. So how was this standard or guideline drawn up, like the rule of having a 10-meter separation? We have never heard of these requirements in the past. So how were these guidelines drawn up, and why did you suddenly introduce these restrictions?
First questions. 第二同第三條啦，就係
As for the second and third questions, at the situation with First Aiders and Prince Edward Station, I would hand over to Mr. Kong. I would take the fourth question. Mr. Williams.
Said it was an object. My next phrase was going to be, the video is very out of focus, and it could have been an object, a person, a bag, or a vest, before I was interrupted. The other video is also online, and I'm sure you can search it for yourself. The police will try to locate the makers of these videos to verify the authenticity of both videos. So we request the makers of the video to come forward to assist our inquiries. That's it. Thank you.
On the second question, for arrests made by the police during our operation, like we said at the beginning, we are not trying to identify the roles or identities of the persons involved. Instead, we were looking at the evidence, the results of the search, the context of the situation, etc. For example, if certain tools are found from that person, then we would assess whether an unlawful assembly or even violence took place at the scene before we can exercise judgment on whether that person might be in possession of an offensive weapon or a weapon for that can be used to attack people. So the roles and outfits of a person might be a point of consideration, but before we make an arrest, we would consider a series of factors, including the context of the incident, the what the arrested person tells us when we are trying to understand the issue, but I cannot divulge more. As for arrests made at Prince Edward yesterday, some people asked to be covered by one of our police shields. I think, well, it was a rather specific detail, and I have no information to share. Well, even if you show me the relevant footage, I could not verify the facts from the officer involved, and that would not be fair for to anyone. So I would gather more information before I try to address the question. The speaker is not coming through the microphone.
Thank you. Shall allow Mr. Z to take the remaining questions first. Mr. Z, with regard to your fourth question, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a few words. Indeed, you have seen recently that police officers and reporters have had disputes and misunderstanding in relation to the distance between them. I think you cannot rule out the fact that Hong Kong has changed substantially from what it used to be. We're not talking about a traffic accident or a crime, but we're talking about unrests that take place at weekends and in late evening. So our approach may be different from our usual practice because it is indeed very dangerous in the confusion. Recently, when the police advanced or effected arrests, very often they were arrested by violent people, and people even try to snatch the arrested persons. In the case of the attempt to snatch the pistol, many rioters would encircle a police officer to attack him and to snatch his gun. Apart from protesters, some reporters and self-proclaimed first aiders were very close to police officers as well. Ordinarily, when there was no risk of an arrested person being snatched, of course, the distance could be closer because there was no fear of assault. And to protect their safety nowadays, police officers are justified to ask you to stay a little bit apart. I've never said that genuine and professional reporters would carry out unlawful behavior or snatch protesters. Many people said that I've said so, but in fact, I've never said so. People with ulterior motives may use journalists as a shield, or use the identity of reporter as a shield. So if reporters are very close, some rioters may use you as a shield. In just last weekend, we have seen how suddenly people would jump up from a group of reporters and threw objects out, so they may disguise themselves as protesters and as reporters. And when we search and intercept them, they will not be able to explain themselves. And we've seen this in past weekends. So when there is extreme violence and there are chaos, you may feel that we have adopted a different standard. I ask for your understanding. Whether it be on online or live coverage, I've seen many reporters being hit by bricks as well as petrol bombs from rioters. Well, we attach significance to your safety as well. To avoid misunderstanding and to avoid unnecessary physical contact in our operations, I urge all reporters to take care of your own safety first, and please do not stay too close in the middle of a police operation. Third row, the gentleman. I'm from Xinhua. We've seen cases. Well, we've seen two video clips when civilians were beaten by rioters. In one case, it was an elderly gentleman who was fisted at his head many times, and then a woman used a metal frame to hit his head. And in the second video, it was clearly shown that someone were assaulting another one. Can you see their faces clearly, and have you arrested them already? Now, if they are arrested, what would be their charges and what would be the maximum penalty? And as for snatching of the police pistol, we saw someone attempting, although unsuccessfully, to snatch a police officer's pistol. In the police-related regulations, I'd like to know whether there are clear instructions on what action can be taken when a police officer's gun is being snatched. And if the gun is indeed snatched, what corresponding action can the police take? Can the police fire at the culprit without prior warning to ensure that no one will be hurt by the culprit? Mr. Lee, and to be followed by Mr. Feng. In the case you referred to, the Anti-North Serious Crime Unit is following up. So far, no one has been arrested. We will rely on Section 17 of Cap 221, that is the attempt to seriously harm a person, and the maximum penalty can be life imprisonment. Mr. Feng? In answering another reporter's question, I mentioned that when our colleagues' pistols are being snatched, what can be done in our training to all police officers, whether they be new recruits or whether they're receiving ongoing training. We have training to prevent their pistols from being snatched. We have continuous training for officers, hoping that we can stop this from happening or prevent this from happening. We review officers' accoutrement from time to time and provide them with the most suitable accoutrement to ensure that their pistols and accoutrement will not be tampered with. If a colleague's pistol is being snatched, how can he tackle it? Is there a general rule for the person to be fired at? Well, I've said a number of times that we cannot generalize, because we have guidelines on the use of force. I have stressed time and again that we have very stringent rules on the use of force. We have to consider both the necessity and proportionality. As regards the type of force to be used to tackle a violent person trying to snatch a police gun, will rely on the professional judgment of officers at scene. They can decide on the ways and means to direct the person who has snatched his gun to lay it down. And we have to protect ourselves and other persons from serious bodily harm. If a colleague is of the view that he will face imminent bodily harm, then the level of threat or the level of force can be escalated. And in answering an English question, I was asked the penalty for snatching a police gun. We do not have an offense on that. However, there can be related offenses. There can be robbery, snatching, assault against the police, and illegal possession of guns and ammunition. Since we use the word snatch, then it is tantamount to robbery. Robbery is a serious offense, and the maximum penalty can be life imprisonment. And we condemn people who have tried to snatch police guns, and we hope this will not happen again.
In terms of the use of force, we have to assess the threats we face. If our pistol is indeed snatched, and we would also consider the threats faced by the officer himself, and these would be considered before deciding the action. Any use of force must be necessary and proportionate. If a pistol carrying live rounds is snatched, do you feel it warrants the use of force in order to contain the situation? This is a lethal weapon, so how are we going to stop that from happening? So these must be considered by the police officers. So decisions cannot be made in a vacuum. All these would be considered. I'd like to ask about what happened at Tuen Mun in Saturday. Well, it is not your turn. The journalist from Apple Daily in stripes. The reporter in stripes, please. Please identify yourself. I'm CMP.
How can the police guarantee the safety of reporters and first aiders at the scene if you're asking them to? I know you said, oh, we should stand further away from the police when they're doing dispersal operations, but on Sunday, one of our colleagues was hit by a police baton by a riot police officer, and he said he was standing very far away, and he was clearly dressed as a reporter. He had a camera, and he was wearing his press vest. So how do you guarantee that, and other reporters have also reported that they've been either pepper sprayed or in other ways injured by police officers on the job. So how do you guarantee that when we are out there, we can be safe and not be, assaulted by police officers? And the other question is regarding the video of the man being kicked in the back alley. If you say that it might have been an object and not a man, what kind of threat did the object pose that you needed more than, say, 5 police officers surrounding that object? And yes.
May I invite Mr. Vasco to answer the second one first?
The fact is, there's 3 people taken to the back alley, into that alley, okay? 2 were brought in for inquiries. The 3rd man was the one wearing a yellow shirt, okay? He was brought in afterwards for having assaulted police at the cordon line, okay? After inquiries, the first 2 were released because nothing was untoward. The 3rd one was searched in the alley. Now you say, why were there so many people, so many police in that alley? Well, that was corresponding to the number of protesters, the rioters that were on the streets that day. Outside on Fengyao North Street, there were over 100 people there. And the police had retreated into that alley. So that's why they were there. Now, the reason I said it was an object is because the video is very unfocused. When I first looked at it, I couldn't identify what that was. I had to make inquiries to see what clothing the 3 persons taken to the alley were wearing to try to identify if it was a person. So that is why I said it might be an object. And the very fact that I saw another video which had no assault in it at all would suggest that one of these 2 videos is doctored. They can't both be true, can they? Can they? They can't, right? So obviously one of them is doctored. Now, knowing you're being videoed, do you think any police officer would be that stupid to assault someone under detention? I don't think so. But of course, we will investigate this. And anybody saying that they know the maker of these videos, please ask them to come forward. We're more than interested in investigating this, because this tarnishes the image of the Hong Kong police. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
For the second question, I'll try to answer that in 2 parts. First, about the incident. I think you're talking about the incident at around 18,000 in Satiloi. And our officers came under the attack of bricks by rioters. And these necessitate our use of force at that moment. And our officers then conducted dispersal operations with tear gas and rubber baton rounds being used at that moment. Multiple units included in that operation, including the special tactical contingents and emergency unit, were involved in that operations. We did some fact check, but there have not been any reports of baton being used. But I need to do further investigations. But since these are very strong allegations, and we'll take it very seriously, and we'll look into that case, and for your staff being alleged that he was attacked in that incident, they can make use of well-established capo mechanisms, and he can make that complaint. While for the general advice for reporters in that similar situations, we must emphasize that police do not target reporters intentionally. And basically all our officers do not have bad intentions against reporters. And I can advise that no matter reporters or self-proclaimed medics, do not come into direct contact or with close contact with police officers. And I would say in the current environments, basically all our officers were constantly on very heightened alert while on duties because they have been attacked by the radical protester very frequently. And our top priority in that kind of situation is to control the situation and stop the violence. And while we respect the journalism and the freedom of press, but we must first ensure the safety of our officers as well as all the people in that kind of life or death situations. My advice is to keep a safe distance from those police officers who are in the operation mode when they are dispersing the crowds or they are making the arrest.
This is the end of the press conference. Thank you. We will take one more question.
It's on Facebook. It's on Facebook. I saw it on Facebook about 30 minutes ago.
Please raise your hand and we will allow one more question. Commercial radio, please. Good afternoon. At recent times, we see that there were more and more cases involving people of different political views. And in June and July, we did not see so many such cases. First, there were altercations, and then they became assaults. When the police deal with conflicts between people of different views, at the beginning, at Halted Plaza, young people were arrested, and older ones or the middle-aged people were not arrested. And as such, some protesters might want to take matters into their own hands. Do you agree that if you adopted uniform standards at the beginning, then the recent assaults would not happen? And I also have another related question. And after the general strike on the 5th of August, there were attacks in Yuen Long and North Point as well as Tsuen Wan. Were anyone arrested in those cases? It has been nearly 2 months. As for the cases in Yuen Long where people took justice into their own hands, as for the yellow vest who was alleged to have beaten up people was attacked. So what did that person actually do to constitute assault on police officer, or was he merely criticizing the police? The police said they would not conduct blatant attacks in the spotlight, but one such example was the attack by 7 police officers in the past. So how can you be so sure?
The second question, I think you're referring to the cases that took place in Tsuen Wan, Yuen Long, and North Point. Mr. Gong, do you have any information with you?
Ali was arrested for assaulting police. Now, what occurred was when the first 2, as I mentioned before, were intercepted for inquiries, they were brought into the alley. When they were brought into the alley, a check line was formed at the entrance of the alleyway. Protesters, radical protesters, charged that process line. During that protest, those radical protesters, one of them, the man that was subsequently arrested for assaulting police, had pushed an officer several times, knocked him to the ground, and when the arrest was declared, he bit the officer in the right hand. He was then brought into the alleyway. That is why he was arrested, not for shouting slogans. He was arrested because he assaulted a police officer. Now, why do I say we're so certain? We're not certain. That's why we're asking. There are 2 videos online. 2 videos showing completely different things. Both can't be genuine. But the question I ask is, do you think in this day and age, knowing full well the video cameras everywhere, that any police officer would be so stupid to assault anybody in public. 5 years ago, yes. Not now. Well,
And they were shining white lights preventing us from filming them.
there are videos everywhere. There are videos everywhere.
Mr. William, I think
This is the point. So the videos have to be verified, correct? You say you know the witness that made that video. Is that not correct? Please ask them to come forward.
我諗咁樣啦，好嘛？咁啊，因為
such assault. There is.
我諗咁樣啦，好嘛？Mr.
How about this, Mr. Williams? Let's give the floor to Mr. Kong to take the remaining questions. Right, the first question. This is something what the police and the public don't want to see, and that is, in society, we have a certain sense of lawlessness with no regard for the law, whether it be vandalism at MTR stations or fights or a gang assaulting some individuals on the streets because of different political views. Well, for people arrested, of people with different political convictions. And let me repeat once again. There are reasons for us unable to make arrests at once. Now, you refer to cases in North Point, Tsuen Wan, and that could also cover the vandalism of electrical building on the 1st of July. There were many occasions when arrests could not be made at once. And for some of them, you may feel that they cover people of certain political convictions. But I've just quoted an example involving people with different political views. So I will not agree that the police have been impartial in our enforcement action. And we have to take into account a number of factors, including the manpower available and also our assessment on whether a massive arrest would cause the tension to escalate. I've quoted different examples. Now, if we are to deploy a big team of officers to arrest people at once, then inevitably there will be large-scale clashes, and there can be bloodshed. Bloodshed may not be avoidable. So the police deployment involves a lot of complicated considerations. Our standard for making arrests would give no regard to the person's status, political views, and all unlawful behavior is unlawful. We take all unlawful behavior and violence very seriously. We do not condone such behavior. You refer to the situation on the 5th of August. According to my record, in both Tsuen Wan and North Point, there were violent incidents. The crime unit of both, the regional crime units of both districts are now investigating. It's interesting that in both cases, the victims, the injured victims, would not come out to give evidence. So we are still short of very important evidence. So for people who claim to have been assaulted and witnesses as well, we urge them to come out and give us information. Thank you. In conclusion, I'd like to supplement what Mr. Kong said just now. In the past 3 months, there were many violent scenes. The police have arrested over 1,400 persons, covering different incidents and people with different political views. For some cases, we've arrested more people, and for others, we need longer investigation. And please do not preempt our action, and don't say that we would only arrest people of a certain political view. And we have already disclosed a number of arrests at previous PCs, and there are reasons for us not to arrest people at once, and we have taken action to pursue those who have broken the law. For some cases, we cannot make arrests effectively, all because the victims were not willing to come on and give us information. This has made it very difficult for the police to follow up and to take action. And therefore, as I said right from start, any victims of assaults should tell the police, give us an account of what happened, give us information so we can follow up. You talked about people fighting among themselves and also a gang assaulting ordinary citizens. This is serious violence that cannot be tolerated. Please do not find excuses for those who have resorted to violence to sort things out, and do not blame other police. This is putting the carts before